It is 2:14 a.m. at a remote Russian long-range aviation base deep inside the country's interior. The airfield seems calm at first glance. Sodium lights bleach the concrete, maintenance crews move around in reflective vests, and the only sounds are diesel engines idling and the whine of ground power units under heavy load. At the far end of the apron, three Tu-160 White Swan strategic bombers sit on their dispersal stands, wings swept back. Missile bays closed, waiting for the final checks before another night of cruise missile launches against Ukraine. On nights like this, the plan is always the same. Load 𝙤𝙤𝙤𝙤 missiles, take off under fighter escort, and send long-range strikes toward cities, power plants, and critical infrastructure hundreds of kilometers away. For Ukraine, these aircraft represent more than just expensive pieces of metal. Every Tu-160 sortie translates into a fresh volley of cruise missiles aimed at power grids, heating networks, railway hubs, and residential districts far from the front line. Blackouts in winter, destroyed transformer stations, and shattered apartment blocks can all be traced back to the moment these bombers open their bays and release their payloads. That is why Ukrainian planners classify the Tu-160 fleet as a high-value strategic target. If the launch platforms can be damaged, delayed, or forced to relocate, the intensity and frequency of missile attacks on Ukrainian civilians are reduced. The base itself is built to project an aura of invulnerability. Layers of surface-to-air missile systems form an overlapping dome around the region. Long-range systems guard the upper atmosphere, medium-range batteries cover probable approach corridors, and short-range gun and missile systems ring the airfield to swat down anything that gets too close. Overhead, radar antennas sweep the sky in slow, relentless arcs, reinforcing the belief that nothing small and slow can penetrate this defensive shell. On paper and in doctrine manuals, this location should be one of the safest in the Russian network. But over many months, Ukrainian intelligence has been quietly dismantling that illusion. Satellite imagery has been used to map the pattern of bomber parking positions, fuel truck staging areas, and missile storage bunkers. Signals intelligence has monitored radio traffic and ground crew routines to identify when bombers are parked, fueled, armed, and yet still stationary on the apron. Open-source video clips and photos posted by local residents have been cross-checked against geolocation data to confirm the layout of the surrounding terrain, road network, and civilian infrastructure. Combined, this produces a detailed picture, where the Tu-160s sleep, where they are most vulnerable, and how the local air defenses react when they are threatened. The mission planners in Kyiv select a mixed package of systems for this operation. The strike element will be formed by long-range kamikaze drones with extended fuel tanks, optimized propeller efficiency, and warheads sized to destroy key structural sections of aircraft or trigger secondary explosions in fuel and support equipment. To escort them, a second group of drones carries electronic warfare payloads and radar reflectors designed to mimic the signature of large cruise missiles, forcing Russian radar operators to classify them as high-priority threats. The concept is asymmetric. Inexpensive drones will be used to threaten and damage assets that cost hundreds of millions of dollars at distances previously regarded as beyond Ukraine's reach. Distance and detection are the primary challenges. The target base lies far beyond the front line, behind multiple belts of radar coverage and intersecting engagement zones. Flying directly and high would guarantee early detection and destruction. To counter this, engineers combine satellite navigation with inertial systems and preloaded digital terrain maps, allowing the strike drones to follow valleys, riverbeds, and forest belts at very low altitude. In this regime, ground-based radar loses sight of them behind the curvature of the Earth and is forced to peer through layers of ground clutter, making small, slow targets harder to distinguish from background noise. Navigation tolerance is tight. Small errors at long range can translate into kilometers of deviation at the end of the mission. Finally, the timing window is chosen with care. The operation is scheduled for a night when several Tu-160s are expected to be on the ground undergoing pre-flight preparations for a large strike package. In this period, fuel lines are connected, missiles are mounted, and crews are briefed. The bombers are exposed, heavily loaded, and yet not yet in the air. At the same time, air defense crews are adjusting to the increased tempo of activity, coordinating with other units, and watching for threats they assume will be coming toward key cities, not back toward their own base. It is in this narrow overlap of vulnerability and distraction that Ukraine intends to strike. Shortly after midnight, the first wave of Ukrainian drones lifts off from improvised launch sites far from the front line. Their initial climb is brief. Once navigation systems confirm the correct heading, each drone drops to a few dozen meters above the terrain, disappearing into the night. The sky remains quiet. There are no manned aircraft, no large formations, only isolated signatures too small and too low to register on long-range search radars. For the first stage of the journey, strict radio silence is maintained. The drones rely entirely on their pre-programmed routes and inertial backups, correcting only when terrain-matching algorithms detect small deviations. The second component of the mission launches shortly afterward. These drones are larger, fly higher, and carry decoy and jamming payloads. Unlike the strike drones, they are designed to be seen. Their radar reflectors are tuned to imitate the signature of long-range cruise missiles. Their flight profiles mimic the classic approach corridors of weapons that might threaten command centers or critical infrastructure. As they cross into Russian airspace at medium altitude, search radars begin to notice them. Track files appear on operator screens. Classification algorithms assign them as likely cruise missiles, and commanders are forced to respond. Within minutes, long-range surface-to-air missile batteries begin to engage the apparent threat. Interceptor missiles, each worth a small fortune, arc into the sky in pursuit of what their systems believe are high-value targets. From the perspective of the Ukrainian planner, every such launch is a success. A missile fired at a decoy cannot later be used to threaten manned Ukrainian aircraft, frontline air defenses, or future drone swarms. More importantly, the process of tracking, engaging, and confirming the destruction of these decoys pulls the attention of radar crews toward higher altitude and outward-facing sectors. Meanwhile, the true strike drones press forward at low altitude. They are now flying through the gaps created by terrain and by the way radar beams propagate close to the ground. In this zone, the slightest hill, building, or tree line can serve as cover, breaking line of sight for several kilometers. To maintain precise navigation under these conditions, the drones blend inertial data with periodic short bursts of satellite updates, transmitted over narrow, frequency-hopping links. These bursts are brief enough that even dedicated electronic warfare units have difficulty locking onto them before they cease. As the drones approach the wider region around the bomber base, electronic warfare escorts begin to operate more aggressively. They emit tailored jamming signals aimed at specific radar bands used by the base's short-range defenses. The goal is not to blind the entire network, that would risk giving away the presence of a deliberate attack, but to introduce enough noise and intermittent interference that low-altitude contacts flicker, disappear, and then reappear on operator screens. In such an environment, human reaction time, software filtering, and radar refresh rates struggle to keep up with small targets closing rapidly from an unexpected direction. At a distance of only a few kilometers from the perimeter, the strike drones transition into their terminal phase. Electro-optical sensors and thermal cameras switch to higher refresh modes and begin scanning for specific visual cues: runway lighting, floodlights reflecting off white fuselages, the characteristic plan form of the Tu-160's wings, and the outline of refueling trucks parked underneath. The terrain-following mode eases, allowing the drones to climb slightly to clear fences and small structures. Navigation now combines map matching with real-time image recognition, ensuring that pre-planned waypoints align with reality on the ground. Inside the base's command post, short-range radar operators begin to realize that something is wrong. Their screens show faint, intermittent returns at very low altitude, much closer than they would expect for traditional threats. Some of the systems are physically constrained. Gun mounts and missile launchers have minimum engagement distances and elevation limits, leaving small blind cones near the perimeter. Others are struggling because their software is tuned to prioritize larger, faster objects approaching on more conventional trajectories. The defense network, optimized for a different threat set, is being asked to solve a problem it was not primarily designed for. The strike formation now splits according to the targeting plan. A first group of drones is tasked directly against the Tu-160 airframes. Their aim points are critical structural and functional areas: engine nacelles where fuel and air mix, wing roots where structural loads concentrate, and regions under the fuselage where missile pylons attach. The explosives they carry are not enormous, but they are carefully selected to penetrate outer skins and fragment internal structures. Even without detonating fuel or munitions, a well-placed hit can bend structural elements, destroy wiring looms, and render avionics bays unserviceable. A second group of drones focuses on support infrastructure. They dive toward fuel trucks, parked tankers, electrical transformers feeding hangars and ground support equipment, and racks used to store or move air-launched cruise missiles on trolleys. The guiding principle is simple. An aircraft is only useful if it can be fueled, armed, and serviced. By damaging the enabling infrastructure around the bombers, the strike extends its effect beyond the number of airframes directly hit. Repairing a wing can take months. Rebuilding a burnt-out handling line and transformer yard can halt operations for an entire base. In the final seconds before impact, the drones switch to fully autonomous terminal guidance. The data link back to the operators becomes optional. Latency, jamming, or sudden loss of connection will no longer alter the outcome. Each drone compares its last known position, sensor feed, and stored target profile, then commits to its dive. From the ground, the sequence is brutal and brief. A low mechanical buzz, a sudden rise in engine note, then flashes of light and concussive thumps as the warheads detonate in close sequence. The quiet orderliness of the apron dissolves into fire, smoke, and frantic movement. When the first shock waves fade, the scale of the damage becomes clear. At least one Tu-160 is visibly engulfed in flames, with fire pouring from the wing root and fuselage and burning fuel running across the concrete. Another bomber appears to have taken a hit near its engines, its tail section scorched, landing gear twisted, and panels torn away. Even aircraft that did not take direct hits are showered with shrapnel and exposed to intense heat, compromising wiring, hydraulics, and composite structures. Foam trucks and emergency crews converge, but each minute of delay allows more damage to spread through fuel lines, coatings, and cables. The surrounding area, once a neat grid of support vehicles and equipment, is transformed into a tangle of overturned fuel bowsers, shattered missile trolleys, and scorched ground support containers. Electrical substations that fed critical hangars and maintenance shelters stand dark, their transformers split and cables burned. Sections of the apron are so badly damaged by fire and spalling concrete that they will need to be cut out and resurfaced before heavy aircraft can safely taxi again. Runway inspection is delayed by debris and the risk of unexploded fragments, further slowing any attempt to launch surviving aircraft for retaliatory missions. Strategically, the implications reach far beyond this one base. The Tu-160 fleet is small, expensive, and technically demanding to maintain. Each airframe represents years of industrial effort, specialized materials, and scarce expertise. Even if some damage is technically repairable, doing so requires facilities, spare parts, and long periods out of service. For a country relying on these bombers to project power and send cruise missile salvos against Ukraine, losing a few airframes or having several grounded for months creates real constraints on campaign planning. The cost comparison is stark. Relatively cheap drones have inflicted damage on flagship assets that cost hundreds of millions to build. The psychological impact on Russian air crews and planners is just as important. Bases that were once considered secure rear areas must now be treated as potential front lines in the drone war. Crews walking under the wings of bombers will know that similar aircraft have already burned under sudden attack hundreds of kilometers from the front. Commanders will be forced to disperse aircraft to more distant or less prepared airfields, complicating logistics and extending flight routes. Every additional layer of security, every extra relocation, adds friction, consumes time, and reduces the tempo and predictability of long-range strike operations. For Ukraine, the operation confirms a trend that has been growing throughout the conflict. Precision drones, supported by good intelligence and careful planning, can reach deep into the aggressor's rear and directly threaten the systems used to attack civilians. Instead of focusing solely on intercepting incoming missiles at the last moment, Ukraine is increasingly striking at the launch platforms, ammunition depots, refineries, and logistical hubs that make such attacks possible. This shifts the balance of cost and risk. Launching a missile becomes not only an expense, but also an invitation for retaliation against the systems that enable it. In the broader picture of modern warfare, such a strike illustrates how the proliferation of relatively affordable unmanned systems can erode the advantages of traditional, high-value platforms. Large bombers, with their long range and heavy payloads, remain powerful tools, but they are no longer beyond the reach of a determined defender willing to innovate. As long as the war continues, every Tu-160 on a dark apron deep inside Russia will carry a new kind of vulnerability. Somewhere, out beyond the radar horizon, slow, quiet drones may already be hunting it.